We're joined this morning here on All Mixed Up by two really good songwriters, Joe D'Urso and Jake Thistle. Joe, Jake, good morning and welcome to All Mixed Up in WDHA.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, as always. You're always a great supporter of the arts in New Jersey.
And one of the things that you have coming up is this Friday night at the South Orange Performing Arts Center. It is the 15th annual show, Songwriters by the Sea. I'm a little confused by the name because last time I checked, South Orange isn't anywhere near the coastline. But nonetheless, Joe, this is a really good lineup you've put together for this.
Yeah, this is a series that Joe Rapolla and I started many. I'll tell you, it's our 15th anniversary, but you throw in the pandemic years, we've been doing it longer. Um, it came out of the Wave Gathering that Gordon Brown had started many moons ago in Asbury Park, and I was playing in America's Cup, which was this little coffee shop in Asbury Park. And the owner there said, "Hey, can you play here every Friday night? I really enjoy it." I said, "It's kind of not what I do." I said, but my buddy and I were thinking about having starting some songwriter series because I had one in Naya called Songwriters by the River that we were doing quite regularly. And we just thought it'd be a good way to try and bring business into Asbury Park because it was still pretty ghost townish at that point. And Joe and I started that up, and different people would come in, and it'd be a pass the hat gig. And it was always funny because Glenn Burtnick was always coming. So I always thought it was great that there was a songwriter in the crowd who actually had a number one hit listening to these other songs. And so for this, and then we started moving up to theaters and whatnot and became part of Light of Day. So this is actually a special edition. So we're not by the sea, but SOPAC was kind enough to give us a budget to bring in great people like Nicole Atkins and Vonda Shepard and Jake and stuff. So yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Vonda Shepard, I'm captivated by her. And the first time I saw her, I didn't know who she was. She was singing backup for Jackson Brown. And I
Mhm.
want to say I saw her at the Beacon Theater. And, there's this striking blonde playing keyboards and singing harmony. And it's just very noticeable. It's hard not to notice her on stage. And then, I don't know, maybe a year or two later, I'm watching television and there's this really quirky show on, Ally McBeal. And I'm looking at this woman behind the piano going, I know her from somewhere.
Right.
And indeed, that was the same woman, Vonda Shepard. She's an incredible songwriter.
Well, Incredibles, I guess in reading some of, because I didn't know a lot about Vonda besides some of her music, was that I was mentioning before we started taping, one of her best friends is Michelle Pfeiffer, whose husband was David Kelly, who was the creator of that show. So they probably knew each other there and always thought she was great. And it was a perfect way to highlight her music. And the great thing about that show, the episodes I caught, because that was the time when I was touring a lot, so I really didn't see a lot of TV. Well, it was kind of Robert Downey Jr.'s sort of his comeback, um, and before Iron Man, and all the other stuff. So yeah, that was a great quirky series, and certainly she got a lot of great exposure for her music and songs.
If only for the song Baby Don't You Break My Heart Slow. Those lyrics are incredible, plus, obviously, the theme to the song. I am intimidated by songwriters. I have to be honest with you. The process amazes me. And Jake, as I've watched your career now for the past few years, you can see a maturation, if you will, in your songwriting approach. What's changed for you with regard to that?
I appreciate it. Even just that you're listening. But yeah, I mean, I've always done it. It's something, I grew up idolizing songwriters, so it was never really a conscious decision to decide, okay, I need to start writing my own songs. It was just, growing up with the influences I grew up with all these classic rock heroes and everything. They played guitar and sang, and they also sang the songs they wrote. So I just started writing songs. So, I think from that standpoint, sort of my whole career that I've been going, I've just been trying to stay at it and keep consistent. And so I think my process has changed a lot now that, I'm on like a label. So I kind of write with a little bit more of a conscious, piece of work in mind. I'm not just sort of pumping out these, choruses and halves and just for fun. It's trying to put together a cohesive piece of music. And that's something I mean, I have fun with the whole process, but one of the things I have the most fun with is sort of sequencing everything and taking this verse and deciding it's better in this song and try to think of it a little bit more bigger picture than just a verse here and a chorus and a guitar solo.
I mentioned being intimidated by songwriting. What I mean by that is, you listen, we just lost Brian Wilson. And a lot of people have been talking in the last week or so about the competition, if you will, between Brian and the Beach Boys, Paul and John in the Beatles. And Brian hears Rubber Soul. I got to top this. And he comes up with Pet Sounds. And Paul and John listen to God Only Knows. And Paul says, how are we ever going to top this? And they come up with Sergeant Pepper. For me, I'm listening to something like Pet Sounds or the Revolver album, or I know, Jake, you're a big fan of Jackson Browne, the Late for the Sky album. And I'm going, yeah, I'm good. I don't need to write anything.
Yeah,
It's
I got to tell you,
very intimidating.
I
Yeah.
used to feel that way when I used to go many years ago. I used to go see the Fab Four in New York, and I was we would walk out of those shows either totally inspired or totally defeated. Because how do you do anything better than that, or what are you going to add to that catalog? And these songwriter shows, especially when we're overseas doing light of day, and I've been in songwriter circles for a long time. You do get inspired by other writers. I'd have Jesse Malin, myself, Willie Nile. The three of us did a bunch of tours, and you know the thing about this songwriter circle is you better bring your A game, because the person in front of you is going to deliver something great. And I never know what I'm going to play, because I like to go off of the song before me and kind of maybe start a theme, or at least a fast, slow, or key changes, whatever it might be. But yeah, the other writers definitely do inspire you when you do this setup.
I don't know how closely you're following the Bruce Springsteen stuff these days. There are 7 albums coming out Friday, which to me is amazing. 7 complete albums that he just said, nah, I'm not ready to release these at some point. Everybody thought that Bruce had this down period for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years between 92 or 93 and 2002. And it turns out that there was all this amazing music. And then he turns around and tells the New York Times a couple of days ago, John Pareles, oh, and by the way, there's a Tracks 3 coming with 5 more albums.
It's an
And the output's
incredible.
incredible.
I think he was kind of taking that Stephen King um, ideology of, Stephen would write 8 hours a day, 9 to 5, like it was a job. And I think, knowing Bruce's history and, the way he looks at it as a job, and maybe he was putting in 8 hour days a lot of the time. You get 3 months in the winter when nothing's going on, you could do a lot of work. But to have all those songs come to you and those words and the melodies, it's not just going to work, it's coming up with stuff.
I think of all the stuff that
Pretty
he's
amazing.
releasing, the one that I'm most looking forward to is an album that's called LA Garage Sessions 83. And that was the album between Nebraska and Born in the USA. And Joe, I may have told you this story. Jake, I don't think you've ever heard this. When Born in the USA came out, Columbia Records people had not heard anything from it. They just knew Bruce was working on another record. So he brings it in, and they're hearing this for the first time, and they're like, whoa. Because what they didn't tell anybody was they thought they were getting Nebraska version 2.0. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
really looking forward to where was Bruce mentally in terms of his songwriting between that Nebraska album and what finally became Born in the USA.
It's
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you, Jake? I don't know if you saw the trailer yet for
I did. Yeah.
and that looks pretty cool. And I like the fact that, one of the great things, and it's probably one of Landau's strongest traits, was he understood that his artists needed to do that before he's going to get to the net, which was going to be Born in the USA. But the repairman line about he needs to heal this before he moves on to that, which is, it's very rare. And I was, as a kid, working for Premier Talent Agency, I worked with a lot of managers. And some of the Tony Dimitriadises of the world, and Paul McGuinness and John Landau, I was exposed to as a young kid. So I understand managers who care about talent, and the managers who are worried about, do you have another hit in there so this wheel can keep going? And there, it's a very different animal. And hearing him say that, and knowing that I'm sure John and Bruce both approved the script, really was kind of a wow. This film has the chance to be something really special if it's done right. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what that record, because it could be nothing like Nebraska. Knowing Bruce, he can just put on a different hat and be that other guy.
Yeah.
But what he says in that one clip to the engineer, Mike Batlin, his roadie, was, "I want to sound like I'm in this room by myself." And Nebraska is still that record to me today. I mean, any gray rainy day that usually gets aired.
Yeah, he figured out how to do one of those classic pandemic projects, 40 years before that
Yes,
actually happened. I mean, it
exactly.
was so ahead of its time,
Very good. Yeah.
in that aspect too.
Yeah.
There are two books that I've recently read. One is the Mike Campbell Heartbreaker memoir, which has some amazing stories in it, and the other is Eternal Flame, the story of the Bangles. And Jake, I'll pose this to you because you're early in your career. The Bangles make their first record, and then they come back to Columbia, and they're being told you have to have this producer, and this is going to have to be done, and that's going to be have to be done. And oh, by the way, you may not be playing on these tracks. And I don't remember if it was Vicky or Debbie Peterson who said in the book, I have no idea how a band makes its second record because of all of the different pressures that are coming on. You're earlier in your, excuse me, you're early in your career. You've got some stuff that's come out. What do you feel in terms of that? Because you have your whole life to do your first album, and then however much time it takes because somebody's saying, hey, kid, we need another record.
Yeah, I kind of consider myself lucky in the fact that I did one of those, pandemic projects I just mentioned, and I put out a record at the very end of 2020. That was a super low pressure thing. I was a sophomore in high school when the world shut down, so I kind of just had nothing going on, and I needed something to keep myself sane. So I just did that over like a period of 6 months, and it was a lot of fun. And then I was able to just sit on it and keep plugging away, and do a bunch of light of day stuff and things like that. And then eventually, I put out a full band EP in 2023. So I sort of had 3 years as kind of a reset, and I could sort of put away my everything. So that I, in a lot of ways consider that EP, it was 7 songs. We call it an EP because it's kind of between an album and an EP, and we would rather people be pleasantly surprised at how many songs and disappointed it was only 7. Um, so I kind of consider that my first release as well. And so I kind of got 2 opportunities where I can, on that last release, consider it my first release, yet still also have it serve as a follow-up. And I do still play some of the older songs live. So now that I'm coming into my actual second release on this label, it feels a lot more like a follow-up than my first follow-up did. So I'm sort of navigating that now, but I've been having a blast, and we're trying to work with a bunch of different producers, which is at least depending on what some of my other friends have done, and Joe, I know you've done, a lot of different ways of recording too, but a lot of my friends, they'll go with one producer, they'll bring in a band, and they'll do the record. And so I'm really excited to do that one day. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. But as of now, I'm really excited to be trying out as many things as possible to sort of refine my sound into a way that I'm most comfortable with. And right now, we've sort of deemed that as through a bunch of different producers and working one-on-one and overdubs and recording a lot of the instruments yourself, so you can really analyze and fine tune, all the tracks.
In addition to the Songwriters by the Sea show that you're both performing at this Friday in South Orange at the South Orange Performing Arts Center, Jake, I know you have a bunch of shows coming up throughout the summer in New Jersey, and you can check those out at jakethistle.com. Joe, you have a birthday bash coming up as well. Tell us about that.
I do my annual show at the Turning Point up in Piermont, the legendary Turning Point, where I think Jake might have opened one of those shows when he was like 16 or
It was
17.
yeah, it was, I opened for you on my 18th
Oh,
birthday.
that's right.
Yeah.
I was doing a show earlier. That's right. And then last year we did a bigger one for my 60th at the Wonder Bar, which was a great night, and Jake and his band had played on that. But this year we'll be at the Turning Point the night after SOPAC. We'll be there on Saturday, June 28th. And yeah, it's kind of been, I've been fortunate to have a home spot like the Turning Point since 1992. It's been around for 49 years. And as a songwriter, it's been instrumental in my growth over the years. Just
Songwriters by the Sea this Friday night, the 15th anniversary show at the South Orange Performing Arts Center. Tickets and information at sopacnow.com. You can also check out Joe's website, jdcaravan.com, and jakethistle.com. Thank you both for joining me this morning, and I hope the show Friday night goes really well.
thank you.
Oh,
So
means the
thanks for
world.
your support, Jim, as always.
Yeah, thanks for having us.